There is a moment every man knows. The moment when something happens. A word said in the wrong tone. A betrayal discovered. A situation that goes wrong in the worst possible way. And something inside him shifts. Something ancient and hot and completely certain of itself rises from a place deeper than thought. Before he has decided anything, the fire is already there, already at full heat, already looking for somewhere to go. Every man knows that moment, and every man knows what it costs him when he lets that fire go where it wants to go. The words said that cannot be unsaid, the door slammed in the face of someone who did not deserve it, the relationship damaged in 60 seconds that took years to build, the reputation broken in a single public moment by something that had nothing to do with who he actually is or what he actually values. The child who watched their father become someone frightening and filed it away in a place that will shape how they experience the world for the rest of their life. Every man knows the cost, and most men, at some point, have paid it. This is not a video that tells you anger is wrong. Anger is fire, and fire is not wrong. Fire warms the home. Fire forges the metal. Fire is one of the most powerful and necessary forces available to a man. The problem is never the fire. The problem is the man who has not learned to govern it, who lets it burn wherever it wants, who mistakes the heat of it for strength, who confuses the volume of his anger with the power of it. The most dangerous man in any room is not the loudest man. He is not the angriest man. He is the man who has learned to carry the fire without being controlled by it. The man who has it and governs it and chooses deliberately, calmly, with full possession of himself, when and how and whether to use it. That man does not lose his life to anger. That man uses his anger in the service of his life. This is about becoming that man. Seneca was one of the greatest minds of the ancient world, a philosopher, a statesman, a man who advised emperors, and he spent years writing about anger, not incidentally, not as a side note in a larger work. He wrote 3 full books dedicated entirely to the subject. 3 books on anger, because he understood that for a man, for any man, in any era, at any level of society, anger was the most urgent problem he would ever face in the governance of himself. He wrote this: "Anger is temporary madness, and the only question about madness is not whether it feels powerful. Madness always feels powerful from the inside. The question is, who is in control, the man or the madness? When anger takes over a man fully and completely, when he stops responding and starts reacting, when the fire burns without governance, it is not the man acting anymore. It is the anger acting through the man, and the anger does not share his values. The anger does not care about his relationships, or his reputation, or the child watching from the doorway, or the words that will still be in the air long after the heat has cooled. The anger has one purpose, and one purpose only: release. And the man who gives it full release pays for it with everything else." Seneca wrote further, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay, not suppression, not the pretense that nothing happened. Delay, the pause between the provocation and the response. The space, however small, however hard to find in the heat of the moment, in which the man, rather than the anger, gets to decide what happens next. That space is where a man's life is either saved or destroyed. Not in the big decisions, not in the major choices, in that small, almost invisible space between the thing that happened and the thing the man does next. The man who can find that space, who has trained himself to find it even when everything in him is burning, that man controls his life. The man who cannot find it gives his life away to every provocation that comes his way. And provocations will always come. I want to talk about what anger actually is, because most men have a wrong understanding of it, and the wrong understanding costs them. The world tells men that anger is strength, that the man who shows anger is the man who is powerful, who commands respect, who makes clear that he will not be mistreated, and there is something in that. A man with no anger at all, a man who cannot be moved by injustice, who cannot feel the heat of a wrong done to him or to someone he loves. That man has a problem of a different kind. Passivity dressed as peace is not virtue. A man who never feels anger is not a man at peace. He is a man disconnected from something essential. But the anger that the world celebrates, the explosive, reactive, uncontrolled anger that a man expresses freely and immediately because he believes it proves his strength, that anger is not strength. That anger is one of the most precise signs of weakness a man can display, because it proves that he is not governing himself. That external events have more control over his interior than he does. That any person, any situation, any comment said in the wrong tone can take the wheel of his life away from him in under a second. That is not power. That is the most fundamental form of powerlessness. To be controlled by what happens to you rather than by what you have decided to be. Here is what anger most often actually is beneath the surface. Fear, or pain, or the particular pain of a man who feels disrespected, which is pain with pride attached to it. Most explosive anger, the kind that erupts suddenly and disproportionately, is not primarily about the thing that appeared to cause it. It is about something older and deeper that the current situation has activated. The man who screams at his child for a small mistake is not primarily angry about the mistake. He is angry about something he carried into that room. The man who escalates a small disagreement into a war is not primarily reacting to the disagreement. He is reacting to something the disagreement reminded him of. Understanding this does not excuse the anger, but it locates it correctly. And a man who can locate his anger correctly, who can ask the honest question beneath the heat, what is this actually about? That man has access to something the reactive man does not. He has access to the truth. And the truth is where healing begins. And healing is where the uncontrolled anger ends. You are a man. That means your anger is your responsibility to understand, not just to manage, not just to suppress or redirect. To understand, because the man who only suppresses his anger without understanding it is a man sitting on a pressure vessel with no release valve, and eventually it will find a way out. And the way it finds when it has been denied too long is rarely the way the man would have chosen. Go inward before you go outward. Understand the fire before you decide what to do with it. There is a moment in the life of Jesus that is almost always misunderstood, a moment that is uncomfortable for people who want a picture of faith that never includes intensity or force. He walked into the temple in Jerusalem, the temple, the most sacred space in the world, to the people around him, and he found it full of merchants, money changers, animal sellers, the noise and commerce of men who had turned a house of prayer into a marketplace. And the scripture says, he made a whip of cords and drove them out. He overturned the tables. He scattered the coins. He drove the animals away. And he said, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. This is the anger of Jesus. Clear, directed, purposeful, not reactive. He did not stumble into the temple and explode. He made a whip. Making a whip takes time. There was a pause. There was intention. The action that followed was not the uncontrolled eruption of a man who lost himself. It was the controlled, deliberate expression of a man who knew exactly what he was angry about, why it was worth being angry about, and exactly what response was proportionate and appropriate. That is righteous anger. Anger in the service of something true. Anger that is governed by the man's values rather than governing the man against his values. Anger that, when it was over, left the situation better rather than worse. Anger that the man could account for, that he could defend, that he could be at peace with when the heat had passed. That is the model. Not the absence of anger, not the performance of a man who has suppressed everything hot inside him and calls it maturity. The presence of anger, fully felt, fully real, and fully governed in the service of what the man actually stands for, expressed in proportion to what the situation actually requires, and then done, complete, not carried forward as resentment, not nursed into something larger, not revisited with additions. Done. That kind of anger does not damage the man who expresses it. It serves him. It serves the people around him. It serves the situation that required it. And it passes cleanly, leaving nothing toxic behind. I want to talk about what uncontrolled anger actually costs. Not abstractly, concretely, in the specific currencies a man spends when he lets the fire burn without governance. It costs him his relationships. Every person who has experienced a man's uncontrolled anger remembers it, not vaguely, specifically. The precise words, the tone of voice, the look on his face, the feeling of being on the receiving end of a fire that was not theirs to carry. And something shifts in them after that experience. A distance opens, a trust closes. They do not leave, not always, not immediately, but they adjust. They begin to manage around him, to choose carefully what they bring to him, to protect themselves by showing him less of the parts of themselves that might activate the fire. And slowly, without either of them quite naming it, the relationship becomes shallower than it was. The intimacy retreats. The closeness that could have been there never quite arrives. The man who loses his temper regularly loses more than his temper. He loses access to the depths of the people around him, because depth requires safety, and safety requires the knowledge that the man will not explode. He ends up surrounded by people who are managing him rather than knowing him. And that loneliness, the loneliness of being close to people in proximity but unreachable in truth, is a loneliness of his own creation. It costs him his children in profoundly. Children do not process a parent's anger the way adults process another adult's anger. They do not have the perspective to understand that the anger is not about them, that their parent is struggling with something deeper than the current situation, that the heat will pass, and tomorrow will be different. They experience the anger as the truth of who their parent is. They file it in the place where they store information about whether the world is safe. And the child who grows up in a home where anger is unpredictable and uncontrolled grows into an adult who carries that unpredictability in their nervous system, who flinches at raised voices, who appeases rather than speaks honestly, who manages relationships by making themselves small to avoid activating the fire they grew up around. That is the inheritance of the uncontrolled man. Not what he intended to leave, not what he would choose if he could see it clearly, but what he leaves nonetheless. And it costs him himself. The man who lives at the mercy of his own anger spends his life in a low-grade state of activation. He is always on the edge of the next eruption, always one provocation away from becoming someone he does not want to be. And in that state, in the exhausting, perpetual readiness to react, he cannot think clearly, cannot plan effectively, cannot feel the subtler things that a man in a calmer interior can feel. He misses things. He misses the quiet moments with his child that required him to be present. He misses the opportunity in the conversation that required him to listen. He misses the instruction from God that required him to be still, because the noise of his own unresolved anger is too loud for any of those things to get through. You are a man. That means the cost of uncontrolled anger is a cost paid not just by you, but by everyone whose life touches yours, and that cost is too high, not for them to pay, for you to keep charging. The book of Proverbs, written by a man who understood the nature of men as well as anyone who ever put words to paper, says this: "A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." Think about what that means for a moment. A city without walls is a city that cannot be defended. Every enemy has access. Every threat walks in unchallenged. Every good thing inside is exposed to whatever wants to take it. The city may have wealth, may have people, may have everything required for a flourishing life, but without walls, none of it is safe. None of it can be held. The walls of a city are not its most impressive feature. They are not what the poets write about or the artists paint. But they are what makes everything else possible. Without them, nothing inside survives. Self-control is the wall, and anger, uncontrolled, ungoverned, given free passage, is the breach in the wall. The place where everything good inside a man's life becomes vulnerable. The man who builds the wall, who develops the discipline of self-governance in the face of provocation, is not the man who has suppressed his fire. He is the man who has learned to keep the fire inside the walls, to direct it, to use it for warmth rather than destruction, to be the one in possession of it rather than possessed by it. Building that wall is the work of a lifetime. No man wakes up one morning and finds that his anger no longer controls him. It is built the way all character is built, in small repetitions, in the daily practice of choosing the pause over the eruption, in the accumulated habit of returning to himself before responding to what happened to him. It is built in prayer. The man who has a daily practice of bringing himself before God, of confessing honestly the anger he is carrying, the fear beneath it, the wound it is protecting. That man has a daily practice of excavation that prevents the pressure from building to the point of eruption. He does not store, he brings it, and in the bringing, some of it is released in a direction that does not damage the people around him. It is built in the pause, the deliberate practice, sometimes agonizing pause between the provocation and the response. The pause where the man gets to decide whether the anger serves the moment or destroys it. The pause gets easier with practice. Not easy. Easier. And every time a man successfully finds the pause, he builds the wall a little higher. Every time he fails, every time he lets the fire go before he has governed it, he learns something about the conditions that make the wall weak, and he prepares better for the next time. It is built slowly, and the building never fully stops. But the man who has been building it for years carries something that the man who never started building it will never carry: a steadiness, a capacity to be in the fire without becoming the fire. I want to close with this image. A man is provoked, not mildly, significantly, something that genuinely warrants a reaction, a real injustice, a real disrespect, something that the anger is right to notice and right to feel. The fire rises. He feels it clearly. He does not pretend. He does not feel it. And he pauses. Not because he is afraid. Not because he is weak. Not because he does not have the capacity to respond with force, if force were what the moment required. He pauses because he has learned to be the governor of this fire, rather than its servant, because he knows that the response he gives in the next 30 seconds will either serve his values or betray them. And he has decided, long before this moment, which of those two things he is willing to do. He breathes, he thinks, he waits until the man inside him, the real man, the governed man, the man who knows what he stands for, has caught up with the heat. And then he responds, not from the anger, from himself, from the values that the anger would have overridden if he had let it. And the response that comes from that place is something the reactive man can never produce. It is clear, it is measured, it is proportionate. It carries the weight of a man who is fully present, fully in possession of himself, fully decided about what this moment requires. And it lands differently than the eruption would have landed, because it is not chaos, it is authority, the authority of a man who governs himself, which is the only authority that anyone ever truly gives another person willingly. That is the man who controls his anger. And that man, the governed man, the man who carries the fire without being burned by it, controls far more than his anger. He controls his words, his relationships, his reputation, the atmosphere of his home, the emotional world his children grow up in, the kind of husband he is in the hardest moments of a marriage, the kind of leader he is when the pressure is real and the stakes are high and everyone is watching to see whether the man will hold. He controls his life, not because anger never comes for him, but because when it does, he is already the master of it. You are a man. That means the fire inside you is yours to govern. It was given to you for a purpose, not for destruction, for heat, for light, for the forging of something worth building, but only if you govern it. Only if you become the man who carries it rather than the man it carries. Govern the fire. Everything you care about depends on it. God bless you. Thank you so much for the support in the comments section. I read all the comments and it really inspires me to make this content more. Thank you so much. God bless us all.